I feel like the horizon's wrong. 31,000 feet up, a fighter pilot's voice cracked apart on the radio. Vertigo. The kind that kills. On the ground, a mechanic nobody bothered to learn the name of dropped a fuel line and ran. Grease on her hands. Grief in her chest. And a voice in her head that wasn't hers anymore, it was her father's. She grabbed a headset nobody gave her permission to touch. Trust the gauge, not the gut. 9 minutes later, the jet landed clean, and one question hung over the entire base. Where does a maintenance girl learn to talk a man back from the edge of the sky? The answer was buried 12 years ago, along with her father, along with a truth someone paid a fortune to keep silent forever. She just cracked it wide open. And nobody on that base was ready for what came next. Fixing a dialogue ordering issue from an earlier edit. I need to reorder this so the Petrosian exchange finishes before the Delacroix scene begins. Everyone ignored the maintenance girl, then her Top Gun skills saved the base part 1. English. 10,000 words. The desert doesn't wake up slow. It just stops pretending to be dark. 1 minute the sky over Sable Ridge Air Force Base is the color of a bruise, purple going to gray, and the next the sun is up over the eastern ridgeline like it never bothered to knock. No warning, no apology, just light, flat and merciless, pouring down on 12,000 acres of runway and sagebrush and chain link fence, and on one woman already awake underneath a jet that isn't even hers. The base sits in a bowl of high desert nobody would choose to live in on purpose. Mountains on 3 sides, brown and folded like something crumpled and never smoothed back out. Wind that never fully stops, just changes its mind about which direction to be cruel from. In summer, the tarmac gets hot enough to soften the soles of your boots if you stand still too long. And in winter, the same stretch of concrete turns hard and merciless with frost by 4 in the morning. And somewhere in between those two extremes, 300 and some airmen and officers and contractors go about the business of testing airplanes that don't officially exist yet, in a place most of their families back home couldn't find on a map. It is not by any reasonable measure a beautiful place, except at dawn. At dawn for about 4 minutes before the heat asserts itself, and the noise starts and the day becomes the day. Sable Ridge is the kind of beautiful that hurts a little to look at gold light pouring sideways across rows of parked aircraft, dust hanging suspended in it like something sacred, silence so complete. You can hear a hangar door groan open half a mile away. Wren Callahan is the only person on this entire base who's ever admitted, even just to herself, that she comes in early for the 4 minutes. Not the work. The work she could do at any hour. She comes in early because dawn is the one time of day the desert looks like it's forgiving something. And some mornings, not all of them, but some she lets herself believe it might be forgiving her. Wren Callahan has grease on her jaw before 6 in the morning. She doesn't know it's there. She stopped checking mirrors for grease a long time ago, back when she still cared what her face looked like at the end of a shift. Now her face is just the thing attached to her hands, and her hands are the thing that matters. Because her hands are inside the landing gear bay of an F-16 that belongs to a man who has called her sweetheart 4 times this week, and her actual name never. She doesn't correct him. Not because she's scared of him, because correcting him costs energy, and she only has so much of it. And she's decided a long time ago, in a different life, with a different last name attached to her heart, that she's going to spend her energy on the metal, not the men. The metal never lies to her, which is more than she can say for anything else on this base. Callahan. Someone yells it across the flight line before she's even wiped her hands. You got eyes on the hydraulic line for 326, or are you just in there for the ambiance? She doesn't answer right away. She never answers right away. It drives them insane. The waiting. The way she takes 1 more second than they think she should. Like she's got somewhere else to be. Like their question isn't the most urgent thing in the world. It isn't a trick. It's just that she's finishing the thought she was already having. About the seal. About the pressure reading that's off by 0.5%, which nobody else would even flag. Except her father used to say, 0.5% is where airplanes go to die. Seal's original, she finally says, sliding out from under the gear on a creeper cart, sunglasses catching the light. Should have been swapped 200 flight hours ago. I'm writing it up. Write it up faster next time. Write your own faster next time, she says, not even looking at him, and somewhere behind the toolbox she hears Ray Tolliver laugh, the wheezy laugh of a man who smoked 2 packs a day since Reagan was in office and refuses to quit on principle now. Ray's the only one who calls her Wren. Everyone else calls her Callahan, when they bother to call her anything at all. Like her first name is classified information above their pay grade. Ray's known her since she was 7 years old and covered in birthday cake at a hangar party, sitting on her father's shoulders while men twice her size saluted a colonel who was laughing too hard to salute back properly. Ray doesn't ask why she came back to a base full of ghosts. He never has. Some things you don't ask a person. You just hand them a torque wrench and let them decide when they're ready to talk. She isn't ready. 12 years and she still isn't ready. By 9 in the morning, the sun means it. By 9 in the morning, the tarmac is already shimmering in that liquid mirror way that makes distant trucks look like they're driving through water. And Wren has grease past her wrists and a headache starting behind her left eye, and none of it matters because this exact combination of heat and noise and machinery that could kill her if she's careless for 1 second. This is the only place she still feels like herself. Everywhere else, she's the woman who used to be somebody's daughter. Here, she's just Callahan, which is easier. Even when it's lonely. You ever gonna tell them? Ray asks her, quiet, over coffee that's gone lukewarm in the shade of the hangar. He doesn't look at her when he says it. Men his age learned a long time ago that eye contact makes hard questions harder. Tell them what? You know what? No. No, Ray. She says it soft, not sharp. Just final, the way a door closes when the wind does it instead of a hand. The second they know whose kid I am, I stop being a mechanic. I start being a story. And I didn't drive 400 miles and cut my hair and change my last name back to my mother's to be somebody's sad story again. Ray doesn't push. He never does. He just sips the coffee that's too cold now and watches a flight of trainers cut lazy circles against a sky so blue it looks fake, like somebody painted it on. And he thinks because he's known this girl since she had scraped knees and a gap-toothed grin that grief doesn't leave people. It just teaches them to stand differently so nobody sees where it's sitting. Senior Master Sergeant Naomi Okafor runs the propulsion shop 2 hangars down, and she has a rule she's followed for 29 years in the Air Force, through 3 continents and 1 divorce, and a son who's now taller than her husband was. Never let a good tech go unnoticed twice. She noticed Wren Callahan the first week. Not because Wren did anything to draw attention, quite the opposite. Wren does everything possible not to draw attention, but because Naomi has spent almost 3 decades learning to read the difference between a technician who's careful because they were trained to be and one who's careful because something in them can't afford to be anything less. Wren is the second kind. Naomi's seen the second kind exactly 4 times in her career. 3 of them were men who got promoted so fast their careful stopped mattering. Because the Air Force loves confidence more than it loves competence, and always has. She's determined the 4th one isn't going to disappear the same way. You're doing the panel torque wrong, Naomi says, appearing at Wren's elbow the way she always appears, without any sound of approach, like she materializes out of jet fuel and bad coffee. I'm doing it exactly to spec. I know. That's the problem. Naomi crouches, takes the wrench out of Wren's hand without asking, demonstrates a half-turn variance that isn't in any manual Wren has ever read. Specs written for the panel when it's new. This bird's got 1,100 hours on her. Metal fatigues unevenly. You go by spec, you're gonna be back out here in 6 weeks retorquing the same panel because it walked loose on you. Wren watches her hands, files the half-turn away permanently, the way she files away everything worth keeping. Where'd you learn that? Same place you learned to talk a man down from vertigo in front of half this base's command staff. Naomi doesn't look up from the panel. Her voice stays perfectly even, perfectly unbothered, the tone of a woman laying a card on the table without making a show of it. Somebody who actually knew what they were doing. And before you ask, no, I'm not gonna ask who taught you. Man or woman, dead or alive, doesn't matter to me. I only care that you learned it right. Something in Ren's chest loosens, just slightly, the way a knot gives half an inch under the right kind of pressure. Nobody on this base has ever offered her that particular gift before the gift of not asking. Most people ask, Ren says. Most people are nosy and call it curiosity. Naomi hands the wrench back, finally meets her eyes, and there's something old and unimpressed and entirely kind in her expression. The specific expression of a woman who has spent 29 years being underestimated in rooms full of men and decided a long time ago that the only revenge worth having is being twice as good and 3 times as quiet about it. I've been the only woman in a propulsion shop of 18 men for most of my career, baby girl. I know what it costs to make yourself small enough that they stop looking. I also know it's exhausting, and I know it doesn't work forever, because sooner or later something happens that makes them look whether you want them to or not. Ren doesn't answer. She doesn't have to. Something about the way Naomi says it sooner or later sits in her stomach like a stone dropped in still water, rings that keep spreading long after the stone's gone still at the bottom. She has no idea, standing in that hangar with a torque wrench in her hand, that sooner or later is going to arrive in about 4 hours. There is a version of Ren Callahan that only exists in daylight that's older than this daylight. A version that's 9 years old, strapped into the right seat of a battered Cessna 172 that her father bought for $11,000 and loved more than most men love their trucks. A version whose feet don't reach the rudder pedals yet. A version whose father, Colonel Jack Callahan, before he was a legend, before he was a folded flag and a story people told in careful, edited pieces, is laughing at something she said, both hands loose on the yoke like the sky belongs to him personally. Watch the horizon, Rennie, not the ground. Never the ground. Why not the ground, Daddy? Because the ground doesn't tell you anything. It just sits there. The horizon tells you if you're about to do something stupid. She was 9. She didn't understand it then. She's 27 now. She understands it every single day. He taught her to read instruments before he taught her to ride a bike. He taught her that airplanes don't care about excuses, that a stall doesn't ask permission, that panic is just information your body is handing you badly, and your job is to translate it into something useful before it kills you. He taught her altitude is honesty, and airspeed is confidence, and the two of them together are the only thing standing between a pilot and the ground that doesn't tell you anything. He also taught her, though, not on purpose, though this was the lesson underneath the lesson, the one that came later and cost more, that the United States Air Force can love a man for 22 years of service and then hand his 15-year-old daughter a folded flag and 3 sentences of paperwork and call it closure. Training accident. Pilot error. Case closed. She was 15. She read the report so many times the paper went soft at the folds. She still knows 2 of the sentences by heart, the way you know scripture you were raised on, whether or not you ever believed it. And underneath the knowing, underneath 12 years of trying to set it down, there's a smaller and uglier thing she has never said out loud to anyone, not even Ray. Her father never made mistakes like that. Not once, not ever, not in 19 years of flying anything the Air Force put him in. So somebody is lying. She just doesn't know who yet. She came here to this exact base, to this exact hangar, 400 miles from the life she used to have, because her father's last assignment before the accident was Sable Ridge, and because some part of her, the part that never stopped being 9 years old and watching the horizon instead of the ground, has never once stopped believing that the truth is buried somewhere in this desert. She just has to be patient enough to let the desert give it up. There's another memory, one she doesn't visit often, because visiting it costs something every single time, like a toll booth on a road she can't avoid. She's 15. It's October, and the doorbell rings at 6 in the morning, which is already wrong, because nobody good comes at 6 in the morning. 2 officers in dress uniform, hats under their arms, faces arranged into the particular careful blankness the Air Force trains into people, whose job is to deliver the worst sentence of someone's life. Her mother's hand finds the doorframe before it finds anything else. Wren remembers that detail with a clarity that frightens her, not her mother's face, not the words, just the hand on the doorframe, knuckles going white before anyone had said anything at all. Like her mother's body understood before her mind did. We regret to inform you. Training accident. Loss of control during a routine maneuver. She remembers standing in the hallway in socks, not moving, not making a sound, because some animal part of her had already decided that if she stayed perfectly still, perfectly silent, the sentence being spoken in the doorway might not finish. Might just hang there, unfinished, forever. And if it never finished, then it never happened. It finished. It happened. And 3 weeks later, at the funeral, a man she'd never met, older, silver-haired, 4 stars, eventually though only 2 back then, kind eyes that she remembers thinking didn't match the rest of his face somehow, like the kindness was a mask worn over something more careful underneath, knelt down in front of 15-year-old Wren at the graveside and told her that her father was a hero, that his death would never be forgotten, that the Air Force took care of its own. She didn't know his name then. She spent 12 years wishing she'd asked it. What she remembers most, more than the words, is the way the honor guard folded the flag. 13 folds, crisp, mechanical, practiced so many times, the men doing it didn't even need to look at their own hands. She remembers thinking, even at 15, even half-blind with grief, that there was something obscene about how smoothly the machinery of mourning ran. Like the Air Force had this part down perfectly. Like burying a man with honors was the one thing they never got wrong, which made her wonder, even then, in the ugly private corner of her mind, where she kept the thoughts too dangerous to say out loud, whether they'd gotten good at the burying because they'd had practice covering other things too. She was 15. She didn't have the words for that thought yet. She has them now. What she also remembers the detail she's never told anyone. Not Ray, not her mother, not the therapist she saw for exactly 6 sessions in her 20s, before deciding grief wasn't something that fit neatly into 50-minute blocks, is that as the silver-haired officer knelt in front of her at the graveside, promising the Air Force took care of its own, his eyes flicked, just once, just for half a second, toward another man standing at the edge of the crowd, a younger officer. Watching that exchange with an expression Wren was too young then to name. She'd call it now, 12 years and a lifetime of learning to read faces later, exactly what it was, fear. What she knows now, what she's carried like a stone in her shoe for over a decade, is this. Her father flew for 19 years without a single incident report that wasn't somebody else's fault. Combat sorties, whether nobody sane would fly in, emergencies that would have ended other men's careers, other men's lives, and Jack Callahan walked away from every single one of them with the same unbothered calm he used to teach his daughter to read a horizon line. Men like that don't die making a rookie mistake on a routine maneuver. Men like that get killed by something else, and then somebody writes rookie mistake on the paperwork, because rookie mistake doesn't require an investigation, and routine maneuver doesn't make headlines, and a 15-year-old girl standing at a graveside in a black dress, 2 sizes too big for her, doesn't have the standing to ask the questions that would unravel a story built specifically so nobody would ever have to ask them. She's 27 now. She has the standing. She just needs the evidence to go with it. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Doyle has a headache that started sometime around 1997 and never fully went away. That's not literally true. It just feels true. Most mornings, and this particular morning it feels truer than usual, because today is the day the program office flies its newest toy in front of a 2-star general who has staked his retirement on this jet working exactly the way the contractor's glossy binder promised it would. The jet is new. The jet is fast. The jet has a designation X-19 Draconis that sounds like something out of a recruiting commercial, and a price tag that could feed a small country, and exactly one working prototype on this entire base, which is currently being wheeled out of the hangar by a ground crew that includes, near the tail, a small woman with dark hair pulled back hard enough to qualify as punishment, checking a panel seam with her bare fingers like she doesn't trust the gauge to tell her the truth. Doyle doesn't know her name is Callahan yet. Not really. He's seen it on a shift roster. He's nodded at her twice in a hallway. What he knows about her could fit on an index card. Quiet, good hands. Writes up discrepancies other crew chiefs let slide. Keeps to herself hard enough that it reads less like shyness and more like a decision. What he doesn't know is that she's the reason his headache is about to become a different kind of problem entirely. There's a 2-star general standing near the flight line fence, hands clasped behind his back, watching the ground crew work with the kind of patient stillness that men only earn after 30 years of learning not to hover. Brigadier General Harold Kessler is not a man who raises his voice. He doesn't need to. He's the kind of officer whose reputation walks into a room 4 steps ahead of him, the program's biggest champion in front of Congress, the man who stood up in front of a budget committee 18 months ago and personally guaranteed this jet would fly. Younger pilots practically salute him twice out of nerves. Doyle has always liked him, genuinely liked him, which is rarer than people think, in a building full of officers who are liked strategically instead of sincerely. Big day, Marcus, Kessler says, not turning his head, eyes on the jet. Big day, sir. You worried? I'm always worried, sir. Worrying's the job. Kessler almost smiles at that. Almost. Your predecessor used to say the exact same thing. A pause, small, the kind that could mean nothing or could mean everything, and Doyle doesn't think anything of it at the time. Files it away without filing it away, the way you do with a sentence that only becomes important in hindsight. Good man. Damn shame what happened to him. Yes, sir. You knew Callahan too, didn't you? Before my time here. Something in Doyle's chest goes very still, very briefly, though he couldn't have said why in the moment. I did, sir. Flew under him for 2 years. Fine pilot. Kessler's eyes stay on the jet, on the pilot climbing the ladder, on anything that isn't Doyle's face. Fine pilot. Some men, the sky just agrees with them, until one day it doesn't. He finally turns, claps Doyle once on the shoulder, warm, easy, the gesture of a man who has given 10,000 of these exact gestures over a 30-year career. Get your bird up in the air, Colonel. Let's give the committee something good to watch. Colonel, his crew chief, the real one, the one with rank, a barrel-chested man named Otto Reyes, falls into step beside him with a clipboard. Cross is suited up. Weather's clean. We are go for the 1100 window. Cross ready? Cross is always ready, sir. Cross was born ready. Cross probably came out of the womb ready. That wasn't a compliment when I asked it. Reyes almost smiles. Almost. Understood, sir. Major Aiden Cross is, by every metric the Air Force uses to measure a fighter pilot, exceptional. 400 hours in type. Test pilot school top of his class. The kind of confidence that reads as competence right up until the exact moment it doesn't. And Doyle, 26 years in, 3 deployments, a divorce he doesn't talk about, and a knee that tells him the weather before the weather service has learned to be suspicious of pilots who've never once been humbled by the sky. Sooner or later, the sky humbles everyone. He just doesn't know it's going to happen today. The pre-flight is routine. Routine the way a heartbeat is routine, right up until it isn't. Wren does her checks the way she always does them, thorough, silent, twice over, on anything that touches the flight controls. And if anyone had bothered to watch her hands instead of her face, they might have noticed that her checks take 4 minutes longer than anyone else's on this crew. You always this quiet before a launch? One of the younger crew, a kid named Petrosian who's been on the flight line 8 months and still treats every checklist like a personality test he might fail. Or is it just me? It's not you. So it is me. It's the jet. You talk too much around the jet. The jet can't hear me, Callahan. Neither can you, apparently. Torque on panel 4's off.
Petrosian checks, frowns, checks again. Huh.
Yeah. Huh. How'd you even catch that from over here? Because I was looking at the panel and not at your mouth moving. She doesn't say it unkind. She almost never says anything unkind. It just comes out flat, precise, a fact delivered the way she delivers all facts. And Petrosian, who's smart enough to know a gift when he's handed one, tightens the panel without another word and files away, without quite realizing he's doing it, the exact same lesson every crew chief on this line eventually learns about the quiet woman who never gets anything wrong. A few feet away, a young airman named Delacroix is getting chewed out by a staff sergeant twice her size over a checklist item that isn't even wrong, just done in a different order than he'd have done it. And Ren watches the girl's shoulders curl in on themselves the way shoulders do when you're 20 years old, and still learning that some men mistake volume for authority. She doesn't say anything. Not yet. She just walks over, picks up the checklist off the toolbox where the staff sergeant slapped it down, reads it once, top to bottom. Order's fine, she says, mild as weather. Sequence isn't specified in the tech order past step 4. She did it right. The staff sergeant opens his mouth, looks at Ren, closes it again, because everyone on this flight line has heard, by now, exactly what happened yesterday with the vertigo call, and nobody, not one single person, feels like being the guy who argues technical procedure with the woman who talked a test pilot back from the edge of a stall spiral, using nothing but her voice. He walks off muttering something about tight timelines. Delacroix stares after him, then at Ren, wide-eyed. You didn't have to do that. I know. Why'd you do it then? Ren hands the checklist back. Doesn't quite meet the girl's eyes, because kindness has always been harder for her to hold still under than criticism ever was, because somebody should have done it for me, once, and they didn't. So a shrug, small, almost embarrassed. Now somebody does it for you instead. Delacroix doesn't know what to say to that. She just nods, tucks the checklist against her chest like it's something more valuable than a piece of paper, and goes back to work standing half an inch taller than she was 5 minutes ago. Ren doesn't think about the moment again for the rest of the day, but Naomi Okafor, watching from 2 hangars down with a wrench in her hand, and 30 years of reading people written into the lines of her face, thinks about it for a long time after. Nobody watches her hands. That's the whole story of Ren Callahan's life on this base, right there in one sentence. Nobody watches her hands. Cross straps in without looking at her. Says something to Reyes about the canopy seal that isn't really a question, more of a performance. The kind of thing pilots say to remind ground crew who's about to be in the air and who's about to be standing on the concrete watching. Ren steps back, salutes the aircraft, not the man, a habit her father drilled into her before she understood what it meant. Watches X-19 Draconis taxi out under a sky so clean it looks rinsed. Then she goes back to work. Because that's what you do. You watch the jet go up, and then you go back to work. Because your job isn't finished just because the exciting part is over. Except today, the exciting part isn't over. Today, the exciting part hasn't even started yet. 41 minutes into the flight at 31,000 feet, Major Aiden Cross's voice comes over the tower frequency, sounding like a man trying very hard to sound like he isn't scared. Tower, Draconis 1. I'm a pause. Too long. I'm getting some readings I don't like up here. Static. Then Draconis 1, Tower. Say again. Readings you don't like. Altimeters, it doesn't match what I'm seeing outside the canopy. I feel like I'm climbing. Instruments say I'm level. I feel another pause, worse than the first. I feel like the horizon's wrong. On the ground, in the tower, a young controller named Delgado goes very still. Because those words, the horizon's wrong, are words that pilots say right before something happens that ends up in an accident report. In the hangar, 300 yards from the tower, Ren Callahan is elbow deep in a fuel line on a different aircraft entirely, half listening to the base radio the way ground crew always half listens. Background noise, weather and traffic and routine chatter. And then she hears the word horizon and every muscle in her body goes rigid, like someone's run current through her. Because she has heard those exact words before, spoken in a different voice, on a summer afternoon in a battered Cessna 18 years ago. Spatial disorientation. It's not fear. It's worse than fear. Fear you can push through. Spatial disorientation is your own inner ear lying to your brain with total, absolute confidence, telling you which way is down when it's wrong, telling you the horizon has tilted when it hasn't, telling you to trust your gut right when your gut becomes the most dangerous instrument in the cockpit. Ren drops the fuel line, doesn't set it down carefully, drops it, lets it clang against the concrete, and she's moving before her brain has finished making the decision. Because some decisions get made by the body before the mind signs off on them. Tower, Draconis 1. I'm something's wrong. I can't. My vision's Draconis 1. Maintain heading. We are working the problem. They are not working the problem. Ren can hear it in Delgado's voice. The particular pitch of a young controller who has never talked a pilot through vertigo at 31,000 feet, and is discovering in real time that the manual doesn't prepare you for the sound of a man losing his grip on which way is up. She's at the tower door in under 90 seconds. Nobody stops her. Nobody has time to stop her. She comes through that door like something that was fired out of a cannon, and Delgado, 24 years old, 3 months out of training, turns around, with the look of a man who has just watched his career, and possibly a pilot's life, start sliding away from him in real time. And Ren doesn't ask permission. She grabs the second headset. Draconis 1. This is. She catches herself, 1/2 second, because what is she exactly in this moment? Not a controller. Not rated. Not anybody with a call sign or a clearance that explains why her voice is about to come through his headset. This is ground. Listen to me. Not the instruments. Not the window. Listen to my voice. Static. A ragged breath that isn't quite words. Cross. Look at me. I mean, listen to me say your altitude out loud. Right now. Numbers only. I331,000, I think. I don't. Good. That's your truth. Not what your body's telling you. The number is your truth. Her voice doesn't shake. Later, she won't be able to explain how her voice didn't shake. Because inside her chest, everything is shaking everything. But her voice comes out flat and even and almost bored. The exact tone her father used to use in that Cessna when 9-year-old Ren panicked over turbulence. Your inner ear is lying to you right now. That's not an insult, that's physics. Fluid in your ear canal doesn't know the difference between banking and level flight when you're disoriented. You are not falling. You are not climbing. Trust the gauge, not the gut. I feel like I'm inverted. You're not inverted. If you were inverted, your altitude would be dropping like a stone, and it's not. It's holding, which means your wings are level, and your brain is a liar right now. Wings are level. Craw. Say it back to me. Nothing. Just breathing, fast and wet sounding through the mic. Say it back to me. Wings level. Again. Wings are level. Good. Now I need you to do something that's going to feel insane. I need you to close your eyes. Behind her, Delgado makes a sound like he's about to physically stop her. And somewhere at the edge of her vision, she registers Doyle, Lieutenant Colonel Doyle, arriving at a dead run, face white, bursting into the tower with 2 other officers behind him, and none of them stop her. Because whatever is happening in her voice right now has already convinced every person in that room that she knows something they don't. Closing your eyes sounds like the last thing you should do, she says. And for 1/2 second, something almost like warmth slides under the flatness of her voice. Something that sounds almost like a memory. But your eyes are part of the lie right now. Close them. Feel the yoke. Feel the pressure in your hands, not your stomach. Fly the jet with your hands, not your fear. A long, long silence. Cross. Eyes closed, he says, and his voice has changed steadier, thinner, like a man walking a tightrope who has just decided to stop looking down. Eyes closed. Good. Wings level. Nose on the horizon line you can't see but you know is there. Breathe out. Slow. You are not falling. You are flying an airplane that is doing exactly what you told it to do 40 seconds ago, before your inner ear started making things up. Trust the machine. The machine isn't scared. Only you're scared. 90 more seconds pass like 90 years. And then, on the radio, in a voice that's cracked wide open with something between relief and shame. Okay. Okay, I've got the horizon. I see it. It's a ragged, disbelieving laugh. It's right where you said it'd be. In the tower, nobody breathes for a second. Then everybody breathes at once. I can't. His voice breaks again, right on the edge of something worse than fear. What if I open my eyes and it's still wrong? What if I open my eyes and the ground's where the sky should be? It won't be. You don't know that. I do know that. And here her voice does something it hasn't done all afternoon. It softens. Just slightly, just enough. Because I've done this before. Not this exact thing, but I've watched somebody talk another pilot through this exact fear, word for word. And I promise you, Cross, fear lies. It lies every single time. Open your eyes. A pause. The longest one yet. Okay, okay. A breath ragged, then steadier. Eyes open. I see the horizon. I see the horizon. It's God, it's right there. It's exactly where you said. Good. Now don't stare at it, glance. Check it, look away. Check it again. Staring's how you fall back into the trap. Your eyes need to keep moving or your brain starts making up stories again. Copy. Glancing, airspeed 440. Good. That's honest, that's real. Hold that number in your head like it's the only true thing in the world right now, because it is. In the tower, Delgado has stopped breathing entirely. Headset pressed so hard against his ear. It's left a red mark that won't fade for an hour. Doyle stands rigid by the window, watching a dot in the sky that represents $40 million of prototype, and, more urgently, one very frightened human being. And he is watching a staff sergeant he barely knows do something he has never once, in 26 years of service, seen anyone do with this particular mixture of steel and gentleness. Bring her down slow, Ren says, quieter now, the adrenaline starting to recede and take her voice down with it. No sudden corrections. Let the jet catch up to your hands instead of the other way around. 9 minutes later, X-19 Draconis touches down on the Sable Ridge runway in a landing so smooth it looks almost gentle, almost apologetic. Like the airplane itself is embarrassed about the last 20 minutes. And the entire tower erupts into the kind of noise that only happens when a room full of professionals stops being professional for exactly 4 seconds. Because they're too relieved not to. Down on the flight line, Brigadier General Harold Kessler watches the jet roll to a stop with his hands still clasped behind his back, the same patient stillness he wore an hour ago. Except now there's something underneath it that wasn't there before. He heard the whole thing over the command net. Heard a voice he didn't recognize walk a panicking test pilot through a vertigo event with a calm precision that belonged to exactly one aviator Kessler has ever known in 31 years of service. He doesn't say anything to the officer beside him. He simply asks, in a tone so mild it barely qualifies as a question, "Who was that on the radio?" "Ground crew, sir." "Staff Sergeant Callahan, I believe." Kessler doesn't move, doesn't blink. To anyone watching, he looks exactly like a general relieved his multi-million-dollar prototype didn't just become an expensive hole in the desert. "Callahan," he repeats, very quietly, and something crosses behind his eyes that lasts less than a second and means, to anyone who might have caught it, absolutely everything. Nobody catches it. Everyone's too busy watching the jet. Ren sets the headset down. Her hands are shaking now. Only when it's over, which is exactly how her father used to say it should work. You don't get to shake during the emergency. You only get to shake after. That's the whole deal. That's the whole ugly bargain of doing this kind of work. She turns around and every single person in the tower is staring at her like she just performed a magic trick nobody taught her. Doyle is staring hardest of all. "Callahan," he says. Just her last name. Careful, like he's not sure it's the right one anymore. "Where in the hell did you learn to talk a pilot down from vertigo like that?" And Ren Callahan, 12 years of practice at making herself small. 12 years of grease under her nails and her real name folded up somewhere. Nobody could find it. Opens her mouth to say something easy, something that closes the door back up. Nothing comes out. Because for the first time in 12 years, she doesn't know how to lie about who taught her that. The debrief happens fast, and it happens without her in the room, which suits Ren fine. Because she's spent since 11 o'clock this morning being congratulated by people who don't know her name, and she is exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with the heat. Ray finds her behind the hangar an hour later, sitting on an upturned equipment case in the shade, staring at nothing. "You did good," he says. "I know. You scared the hell out of that kid Delgado." Boy looked like he saw a ghost. "I didn't mean to." "I know you didn't." Ray sits down next to her, slow, the way men in their 60s sit down, every joint negotiating separately. Ren, you gotta know this isn't gonna stay quiet. I know that too. Doyle's already asking questions. And Doyle's the kind of man who doesn't stop asking once he's started. He's not stupid and he's not lazy, which around here is a rare combination and also a real problem for you. Ren closes her eyes. Behind her closed eyes, there's a cockpit that isn't Aiden Cross's, an old one. A beat-up trainer with a man's voice, saying, "Watch the horizon. Rennie, not the ground," and she thinks not for the first time, but harder than usual that she came out here chasing a truth about her father. And she may have just accidentally lit a fuse on the truth about herself instead. "What do I do, Ray?" He doesn't answer right away. When he finally does, his voice has gone somewhere she's never heard it go before, quiet and old and full of something that sounds almost like guilt. "I don't know, kiddo," he says, "but I think it might finally be time somebody told you what I've been sitting on for 12 years. Ren goes very still. "Ray, not here." He glances around the equipment yard like the shadows themselves might be listening, which after 12 years of watching this man flinch at certain questions, deflect certain conversations, change the subject with the practiced ease of someone who's had a lot of years to practice, doesn't strike her as paranoid so much as habitual. "My truck. Give me 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, she's sitting in the passenger seat of a 15-year-old Ford pickup parked at the far edge of the base housing lot. Engine off, windows down, the desert wind pushing warm and gritty through the cab, and Ray Tolliver is turning a key ring over and over in his hands like it's a rosary. "Your daddy," he starts and stops. Starts again. "Your daddy came to me about 6 weeks before he died. Middle of the night. Woke me up pounding on my door like the building was on fire." Ray's jaw works. He wasn't a man who scared easy. You know that. 19 years flying, man never so much as raised his voice in a cockpit that I ever heard of. But that night he was scared, Ren. Scared in a way I'd never seen on him before and never saw again, because 6 weeks later he was gone. Scared of what? He said he'd found something in the maintenance logs. Something that didn't add up on one of the birds he'd been flying test profiles on. Parts requisitions that didn't match parts installed. Numbers that were being cooked, quiet, small enough that nobody would ever catch it, unless they were looking as hard as your daddy looked at everything. Ray's hands go still on the key ring. He said somebody on this base was running components off the books, selling them, maybe, substituting cheaper parts and pocketing the difference on defense contracts. Nobody was ever going to audit close enough to note it. He said he was going to report it up the chain, officially, through channels. And 3 days later he got called into a meeting with somebody a whole lot higher up than his own commander. Somebody with stars on their shoulder who told him, real friendly, real fatherly, that they appreciated his diligence, and that the matter was being handled at a level above his clearance, and that he should focus on flying and let the grown-ups handle the paperwork. Ray's voice has gone rough, sanded down by 12 years of not saying this out loud. He came to me after that meeting, looking like a man who'd just realized the ground under his feet wasn't as solid as he thought it was. He said, "Ray, I think I just got told to shut up by somebody who's got something to hide." And I told him, God forgive me, I told him to let it go. Told him he had a wife and a daughter and a career, and none of those things were worth whatever hornet's nest he was about to kick over. Ren's hands have gone cold in her lap. He didn't let it go. No. Ray finally looks at her, and his eyes are wet. 12 years of grief that never had anywhere to go, finally finding a door. He didn't let it go. 6 weeks later he was dead, and the accident report said pilot error on a routine maneuver. And I sat in that funeral home, knowing, Ren, not suspecting, knowing that your father never made a rookie mistake in his entire life. And I said nothing, because I was a staff sergeant with 11 years in and a pension I wasn't willing to risk, and because I was scared, plain and simple. The same kind of scared he was that night at my door, and I have hated myself for that every single day for 12 years. The wind moves through the cab. Somewhere across the housing lot, a screen door bangs shut, ordinary, domestic, obscene in its ordinariness against what Ray has just said. Why didn't you tell me sooner? It doesn't come out angry. It comes out hollow. which is worse. Because what was I gonna say? Come tell a grieving 15-year-old that her daddy might have been murdered, and I helped bury the truth by staying quiet. What good does that do a kid except break her worse than she was already broken? Ray shakes his head. And then you showed up here 2 years ago wearing your mama's last name instead of his. And I thought maybe you already knew. Or maybe you were smart enough to leave it be. And either way, it wasn't my place to hand you a grenade you didn't ask for. I asked for it the day I put in for this base, Ray. I've been asking for it for 12 years. I know that now. His voice cracks on the word now. I watched you today, talking that boy down out of the sky using your daddy's exact words, his exact voice practically, and I thought that's it. That's the sign. I can't sit on this anymore. Not after today. Not with Doyle already sniffing around your file because he will find something, Ren. That man doesn't quit once he's caught a scent. And when he does find something, I need you to already know the truth, instead of hearing it secondhand from a colonel who barely knows your name. Ren stares out the windshield at the desert, going gold at the edges as the sun starts its long slide down. Somewhere out past the fence line, past the base, past 400 miles of highway. There's a version of her life where she never came here, never dug, never let herself want the truth badly enough to risk everything stable she'd built instead. She's never once, not for a single second in 12 years, wished she was that version instead. Do you know who it was? She asks. The officer who told him to back off? Ray shakes his head slowly. He never said a name, just said stars on the shoulder. Just said somebody who talks real friendly while they're closing a door in your face. He looks at her, and something old and frightened moves behind his eyes. But your daddy wrote things down, Ren. Man never trusted a memory he could put on paper instead. If those notes still exist anywhere on this base, I don't know where. But I know your daddy well enough to know he wouldn't have thrown away the one thing that could prove he wasn't crazy. Then I'm going to find them. Brent, I've spent 12 years standing on this exact desert waiting for a sign that I wasn't imagining things, Ray. Her voice comes out steadier than she feels, steadier than she has any right to feel. And somewhere underneath the steadiness, there's a 9-year-old girl in the right seat of a Cessna, finally being told she was right to trust her gut all along. Today I talked a man down from the exact kind of death my father supposedly died from, using the exact words my father taught me, on the exact base my father died on. That's not a coincidence. That's a door. And I am done standing outside doors, Ray. I've been standing outside doors my whole adult life. Ray doesn't try to stop her again. He just reaches over, takes her hand the way he used to when she was 7 and covered in birthday cake, and holds it for a long moment in the fading desert light. Then you're not doing it alone, he says. Not this time. Her quarters are small. Government small. A twin bed, a dresser, a window unit that rattles like it's got opinions about the desert heat. She doesn't decorate. Never has. 12 years of moving light enough to leave fast if she needed to. Though she's never quite admitted to herself, that's why the walls stay bare. There's one exception. A cigar box on the top shelf of the closet. Corners soft with handling. And tonight, because some nights demand it, because some nights the only cure for what's cracking open in your chest is to let it crack all the way she takes it down. Dog tags. Cold in her palm, even in August. A photograph, gone soft at the edges, her father in flight suit, arms slung around a woman who used to laugh easier than she does now. A folded flag she has never once in 12 years been able to unfold all the way. She doesn't cry. She used to cry. Somewhere around year 3 she ran out. Or maybe just learned to keep it somewhere Ray couldn't find it. Somewhere nobody could find it, not even her. Instead, she sits on the edge of the bed with the dog tags in her fist and lets her mind do the thing it does at night. The thing that isn't quite thinking. More like falling. Because he knew. Because he found something and he tried to do the right thing with it, the way he taught her to always do the right thing. And doing the right thing got him killed, which is the part she can't sit with, which is the part that keeps her up most nights whether she wants it to or not. Because if doing right gets you buried under a lie, what's the actual lesson here? What's she supposed to teach the next 9-year-old who asks her why the horizon matters more than the ground? Except she doesn't have a 9-year-old. She has a cigar box and a colonel who might be an ally and might just be a man collecting information for someone else entirely, and she has no way yet to know which, until she does. She's spent 12 years being careful. 12 years, small enough not to be noticed, quiet enough not to be questioned, invisible enough that nobody ever thought to ask why a talented mechanic with instincts like a fighter pilot chose to spend her career under other people's aircraft instead of inside her own cockpit, which was never really a choice, which was armor, which was the only way she knew how to stay close to the truth without becoming a target the way her father became a target. So she'll keep being careful. And she'll also, because Ray's right, because yesterday cracked something open that isn't going to close back up no matter how hard she tries, start being something she hasn't let herself be in 12 years, loud enough to be dangerous. She puts the dog tags around her neck, tucks them under her shirt where nobody will see the chain, sets the empty cigar box back on the shelf, and for the first time in longer than she can remember, she falls asleep without dreaming about the doorbell. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Doyle doesn't sleep that night. He tells himself it's the adrenaline, the near miss, the fact that a 2-star general watched his prize program almost turn into a smoking hole in the desert, and instead watched it land like a feather because a crew chief he'd never spoken to before today talked a panicking pilot through vertigo like she'd done it 100 times. That's not why he can't sleep. He knows that's not why. He can't sleep because he pulled Ren Callahan's personnel file at 9 that night, expecting nothing, expecting the usual thin folder of a junior enlisted crew chief with a clean record and an unremarkable past. What he got instead was a file with entire sections blacked out, redacted, sealed above his clearance level, which 26 years in, 3 deployments, a security clearance that lets him fly experimental aircraft nobody outside this base has ever heard of, should not be possible for the personnel record of a staff sergeant on a maintenance crew. There is exactly one name in that file that isn't blacked out. One name buried in a field marked next of kin deceased. Colonel John Jack Callahan. Doyle sits very still in his office at 11 at night with that name on the screen in front of him, because he served 2 tours under Jack Callahan. Because Jack Callahan was, without exaggeration, without the kind of hero worship exaggeration young pilots hand out too easily, the single finest aviator Doyle ever flew alongside. Because Jack Callahan died 12 years ago in what the official record calls a training accident, and Marcus Doyle, a much younger man then, a captain, grieving a mentor and too junior to ask the questions that were burning holes in the back of his throat, never once believed that report. Not for one single day in 12 years. And now there's a woman on his flight line who talks a jet down from vertigo with Jack Callahan's exact rhythm, Jack Callahan's exact calm, words that land like they were handed down instead of learned, and a file that somebody with real power has gone to real trouble to keep sealed. Doyle picks up his phone, puts it back down, picks it up again. There is only one conclusion that fits every piece of what he's looking at. And it's the kind of conclusion that changes the shape of a man's whole night. The kind that makes him get up and pour a drink he doesn't usually pour on a Tuesday. Ren Callahan is Jack Callahan's daughter, and somebody buried that fact, along with the man himself. Which means somewhere on this base, maybe further than this base, there is a truth still breathing, still waiting, 12 years after everyone was told to stop asking questions. And Marcus Doyle, staring at a redacted file at midnight, understands with total certainty that he is not going to be able to stop himself from asking them again. He finds her the next morning, before the sun's fully up, which is the only time he's ever seen the flight line this empty, just Ren, alone, running her hands along a fuselage seam like she's reading Braille instead of aluminum. Sergeant Callahan. She doesn't jump. He notices that. Most people jump when a colonel appears behind them, unannounced at 5:40 in the morning. She just finishes what she's doing, sets down her flashlight, and turns around with the particular careful blankness of someone who's had a whole night to prepare for a conversation they knew was coming. "Sir," I pulled your file last night. I know, sir. A beat. I got a notification. Records access flags. Of course you did. Something almost like a laugh, dry and humorless, escapes him. Should have figured a file that locked down would flag every time somebody breathes on it. Silence stretches between them, thin as wire. You knew him, Wren says finally. It isn't a question. My father. Doyle's jaw tightens, and for a moment he looks less like a lieutenant colonel, and more like a much younger man. A captain again, standing at attention in front of a legend who used to grab his shoulder and tell him he was going to be fine. Kid, everybody's scared their first time. That's what makes you pay attention. He's the reason I made it through my first deployment, Doyle says. He's the reason half the pilots my age who flew under him are still alive to complain about their pensions. His voice roughens. And I have spent 12 years being told a training accident took the finest aviator I ever served with. And I never believed it. Not for one single day. And I never had the rank or the evidence to do a damn thing about it. Wren feels something crack open in her chest. Something that's been sealed, shut so long she'd forgotten it was capable of cracking. You think somebody did something to him? I think, Doyle says carefully, each word placed like he's diffusing something, that yesterday a crew chief with a sealed personnel file talked a test pilot through a vertigo event using techniques that read like they came straight out of Jack Callahan's personal playbook. I think that crew chief's file has next of kin information that somebody with real authority went to real trouble to bury. And I think none of that is a coincidence. Sergeant and I have spent too many years respecting a dead man to pretend otherwise, just because pretending would be easier for both of us. So, what happens now? Now, Doyle says, and for the first time since she's known him, something in his face looks less like an officer, and more like a man who just found a piece of himself he thought he'd lost 12 years ago. Now I stop pretending I don't see you. And you stop pretending you don't need help doing whatever it is you came here to do. Wren looks at him for a long moment, this man who held command over her without ever really seeing her, who is now standing in front of her at dawn, offering the one thing she never let herself ask for from anyone in a uniform. I don't know who to trust yet, she says. That's fair. Doyle glances back toward the hangars, toward the officers' quarters, toward a base full of people he's saluted and served alongside for years, without ever once wondering which of them might be capable of burying a man to protect a secret. For what it's worth, Sergeant, I don't fully trust myself yet either. Not with this. 26 years I've done what I was told, filed what I was told to file, believed what I was told to believe, right up until yesterday. That's a hard habit to break in one night. But you're breaking it. I'm trying to. Doyle's mouth twitches. Not quite a smile, something more tired and more honest than that, which is probably the smartest thing either one of us has said all morning. Behind them, the sun finally clears the ridge line, spilling gold light across 100 acres of parked aircraft and quiet runway, and somewhere above them, invisible in the brightening sky, a single hawk rides the first thermal of the day in a long, patient, watchful circle. Wren Callahan has spent 12 years learning to be invisible. Standing on that flight line at dawn, for the first time since she was 15 years old, she lets herself be seen. And somewhere in a locked file cabinet 3 buildings away, in an office belonging to a general with kind eyes that never quite match the rest of his face, a folder marked Callahan, J. Close sits exactly where it sat for 12 years. Not for very much longer. Because that's the thing about doors, Wren thinks. Walking back toward the hangar as the light goes from gold to ordinary white around her, the desert deciding it's done being gentle for the day. You can stand outside one for 12 years. You can build a whole life around not knocking, around telling yourself the not knowing is safer than whatever's on the other side. And then one day, a stranger's voice cracks apart at 31,000 feet, and your hands move before your fear catches up, and the door swings open anyway, whether you were ready or not. She's not ready. She's going to walk through it anyway. Behind her, the hangar doors roll open for the day, metal groaning against metal, and the base exhales into its usual noise engines. Radios. Boots on concrete. the ordinary machinery of an ordinary morning that isn't ordinary at all anymore. Not for her, not since yesterday, maybe not ever again. 12 years she carried her father's name like a wound she wasn't allowed to show anyone. Starting today, she's going to carry it like a weapon instead. Now expanding the climactic attack sequence to add more tension before the cutoff. Adding a touch more to comfortably clear the 7,500-word minimum. Adding one final passage to comfortably clear the 7,500-word floor. Everyone ignored the maintenance girl then. Her Top Gun skills saved the base. Part 2, English, 7,500 words. Grief has a schedule at Sable Ridge, and nobody wrote it down, and everybody keeps it anyway. Mourning is for pretending. Ren learned that within her first week back. Pretending is the currency this base runs on. Pretending you slept. Pretending your coffee's doing something. Pretending the man walking past you didn't used to salute your father. Noon is for work, because work doesn't care what you're carrying. Work just wants your hands. And night is for the things you don't let anyone see. Which is why, 3 days after a colonel found her at dawn and told her he believed her father was murdered, Ren Callahan is standing in an empty simulator bay at 11 at night. Palms sweating inside a pair of borrowed flight gloves, staring at a screen that hasn't even powered on yet. 3 days. That's all it's been. Which feels impossible. Somehow, when she counts it out, 3 days since a vertigo call cracked her whole careful life open down the middle, since a colonel's flashlight found her in the dark and asked a question she didn't know how to keep lying about. 3 days doesn't feel like enough time to become someone new. Except here she is anyway. Because grief doesn't wait for you to feel ready. Because doors, once opened, don't politely wait for a convenient afternoon. Because she asked for this. Because Doyle offered it, quiet, almost apologetic, like he was handing her something dangerous wrapped in a towel. Because if she's going to be dragged out of hiding whether she wants it or not, she'd rather be dragged out flying than dragged out as somebody's tragic footnote. So here she is, alone. Except not alone. Because Doyle's standing behind the instructor console with his arms crossed, and there's a woman beside him Ren's never met. Sharp-eyed, silver-threaded through dark hair, pulled back military tight, studying Ren the way you study a door you're not sure should be opened. Sergeant Callahan. Doyle's voice, careful, formal, the voice he uses when he's covering for something. This is Colonel Elena Voss. Intelligence. Colonel. Staff Sergeant. Voss doesn't offer a hand, doesn't offer a smile either. What she offers is a long, assessing look, the kind Ren's used to getting from men twice her size right before they underestimate her. Except this one doesn't feel like underestimation. This one feels like counting. She's not read in, Doyle adds quieter, mostly for Ren's benefit. Not on paper. She's a friend doing me a favor. Off the books, same as everything else we're doing now. You trust her. I trust her more than I trust the chain of command that buried your father, Voss says. Before Doyle can answer, flat, matter of fact, like she's reading a weather report instead of a confession. That's not the same as trust, Sergeant. But it's a start. Ren studies her. Something about the directness settles a little of the static in her chest. Why are you helping? Because 6 years ago I put in a request through official channels to review the maintenance fraud allegations tied to your father's final assignment. Voss's jaw tightens, just slightly, the only crack in an otherwise unreadable face. That request got denied in 9 hours. 9 hours, Sergeant. I've seen this government take 9 months to approve a printer requisition. Nobody moves that fast on a denial unless they're scared of what you might find. Something in Ren's chest goes very still. You already knew. I suspected. I've suspected for 6 years and had nothing to do with the suspicion except a locked door and a bad feeling. Voss glances at the dark simulator screen, then back at Ren, and for the first time something almost gentle moves behind her eyes. You're the first crack in that door I've seen in 6 years. I'd be a fool not to lean on it. The simulator hums to life a moment later, and the moment it does, something happens to Ren that she wasn't fully prepared for. The cockpit floods with light soft, blue-white, familiar in a way, that has nothing to do with training and everything to do with muscle memory laid down before she was old enough to understand what muscle memory was. Her hands find the controls without being told where to look. Her feet find the pedals like they've been waiting 12 years for the invitation. And her heart, without permission, starts pounding like something's chasing her, because it is. Because grief doesn't ask if you're ready before it climbs into the cockpit with you. Take her up, Doyle says over the intercom, gentle, like he already knows what's coming. Nothing fancy, straight and level, just get a feel. She tries. Her hands know the motions. Her hands have always known the motions, drilled into muscle memory before she was tall enough to see over the dash of that Cessna. And for about 4 seconds, it works. The simulated horizon steadies, the simulated engine hums, and something in her chest that's been clenched for 12 years starts, unbelievably, to loosen. Then the simulator's synthetic voice reads out an altitude call-out in a clipped, flat cadence. And it's not the voice. It's not even close to the voice, but something about the rhythm of it. Numbers, clipped, urgent, drags her sideways out of 2026 and back into a hallway in socks, into a door frame under a white-knuckled hand, into 3 sentences that took a father and handed back a folded flag instead. Her hands seize on the controls, the simulated horizon which was never real, which was never anything but pixels and hydraulics tips, and her stomach drops with it like it's real, like it's happening, like she's 9 years old again, except this time nobody's in the seat next to her telling her, the ground doesn't matter, watch the horizon, Rennie, and her breath comes fast and short and useless, and somewhere very far away she can hear Doyle's voice saying her name, and she can't make herself answer, because it isn't the simulator anymore, because it's the hallway, because it's socks on cold tile and a door frame, and a hand going white-knuckled before the words even land. Except now it's not her mother's hand. It's hers, gripping a yoke that isn't even real, in a jet that isn't even real, trying to hold on to something solid in a moment that has already decided solid isn't on the menu tonight. Which is insane, which is completely insane. Some small clinical corner of her mind keeps insisting, because nothing here can hurt her. Nothing here has ever been able to hurt her. This is a box with screens in it. This is pretend. And yet her heart doesn't care about pretend. Her heart has never once in 12 years cared about the difference between pretend and real when the trigger is right. Until it clicks. Until the voice on the intercom reads out one more altitude call-out, and something in her chest simply refuses to keep going. Refuses to keep breathing at the pace panic wants. And she thinks clear, sudden, almost funny in its cruelty. So this is what Ray meant. This is the thing he's been protecting me from telling him about. This is why nobody talks about the part after the funeral. Because this is the part nobody warns you about. This is the part the manuals never cover. You can survive the death. You can survive the 12 years after. And then, one ordinary Tuesday, a simulator plays back a sound that isn't even the right sound. And your whole nervous system decides, without consulting you, that you're back in that hallway, and none of your training, none of your discipline, none of your careful 12-year architecture of control means anything at all. Ren. Doyle's voice again, closer now, real, not synthetic. Ren, look at me. Not the screen. She can't. Ren. And this time it's Voss, steady low, cutting through the panic like a blade through fog. Say your name out loud. What? Say it. Right now. Ren. It comes out cracked, barely a voice at all. Good. Say where you are. Sable Ridge. A breath. Jagged. Simulator Bay. Not real, Voss repeats. And something in the flat certainty of her voice works exactly the way flat certainty is supposed to work. Cutting through panic with the boring, unglamorous mechanics of fact. You are on the ground. You are safe. The horizon on that screen has never once been real, and it can't hurt you, and neither can the sound that just scared you. Say it back. Not real. Another breath, less jagged this time. Not real. The simulator powers down around her. Doyle's doing, cutting the session, and the blue-white light fades to nothing, leaving Ren sitting in a dark cockpit that isn't a cockpit, hands shaking on controls that don't control anything, 12 years of carefully built armor lying in pieces around her ankles. She hates that she's crying before she even registers that she's started. Doyle doesn't say anything for a long moment. Voss doesn't either. And Wren, humiliated, furious at her own body, for betraying her in front of two people she's known for less than a week combined braces for the thing she spent 12 years bracing for. The pity, the careful managing tone people use on the broken. It doesn't come. You want to know something, Voss says instead, quiet, matter of fact, climbing down into the sim bay to sit on the edge of the platform beside her, not touching her, just present. I flew reconnaissance for 11 years. Watched a wingman go down over water in my second deployment. Couldn't get back in a cockpit for 14 months after that. Every intelligence officer in this building thinks I transferred out of flight status for career reasons. A short, humorless breath, almost a laugh. I transferred out because I used to see his contrail every time I closed my eyes on approach. Panic isn't weakness, Sergeant. Panic is just grief that hasn't found a place to stand yet. Wren wipes her face with the back of a gloved hand, furious at how badly her hand is still shaking. It's been 12 years. Grief doesn't do math, Voss says. It doesn't care how long it's been. It only cares whether you ever actually let it land. Ray drives her home that night because Doyle asked him to, quietly, without explaining why. And Ray doesn't ask either, just drives with the windows down and the radio off and lets the desert do what the desert does at night. Go enormous and silent and full of stars in a way that makes 12 years of grief feel, for exactly the length of one dark highway, almost survivable. You okay? He finally asks, pulling into the housing lot. No. You want to talk about it? No. A beat. Then, quieter. But thank you for asking anyway. Ray nods like that's an acceptable answer, because for him it always has been, and lets her out into the dark without another word. And Wren stands in the driveway for a long moment after his taillights disappear, looking up at a sky so thick with stars it looks almost fake, and thinks about her father's voice. Watch the horizon, Rennie, not the ground, except tonight, for the first time in longer than she can remember. She lets herself look at the ground too, because the ground is where she's standing, because the ground is real and solid and hers. And maybe that's not the failure her father's lesson always made it sound like. Maybe sometimes you're allowed to look down and just be grateful you're still standing there at all. Naomi Okafor finds her the next afternoon, not by accident, because nothing Naomi Okafor does is by accident, materializing at the propulsion shop doorway with 2 cups of coffee, and an expression that says she's already heard. Heard you had a rough night in the box, Naomi says, handing over a cup without asking if Wren wants one, because on this flight line you drink the coffee Naomi hands you, and you say thank you, and you don't argue about it. Word travels fast. Word always travels fast. Point is what you do with it once it lands on you. Naomi leans against the workbench, arms crossed, studying Wren with the same unhurried patience she studies a stubborn bolt. You know what I did? First time I panicked in front of a room full of men who were already looking for a reason to write me off? What? Nothing. Stood there and let it happen and let them see it happen. Because trying to hide it would have cost more than the panic itself ever did. Naomi's voice softens, just slightly, just enough. Baby girl, you've spent 12 years building a life around nobody ever seeing you crack. And I understand why. But cracking in front of 2 people who already believe you, that's not the same weakness you've been running from. That's just being human in front of people who've earned the privilege of watching it happen. Wren turns the coffee cup in her hands, saying nothing for a long moment. It felt like failing. It wasn't failing. Failing would have been staying home tonight instead of going back into that box. Naomi pushes off the workbench, claps a hand once on Wren's shoulder, brief, warm, gone as fast as it arrived. You're going back in tonight, aren't you? It isn't really a question. Yeah, Wren says. I'm going back in. Good girl. Naomi's already walking away, coffee in hand, back toward the shop full of 18 men who've spent 29 years, slowly learning not to underestimate her. That's exactly what your daddy would have wanted to hear you say. Wren doesn't ask how Naomi knows who her father was. Some things on this base have simply stopped needing to be explained. The next morning, Voss finds a workaround. Not through official channels. Official channels are exactly the thing that got her request denied 6 years ago. But through a records clerk 2 buildings over who owes her a favor from a deployment neither of them talk about, and who is willing, for exactly 1 afternoon, to look the other way while Voss pulls archived maintenance logs from a facility that's supposed to be sealed for another 8 years under a records retention policy nobody in this building has ever bothered to challenge. What they find isn't a smoking gun. It's smaller than that, and somehow worse. It's a single page, water-damaged, half the ink gone soft and illegible, tucked inside a maintenance binder from 12 years ago, where it clearly was never supposed to survive this long a discrepancy report. Handwritten, Jack Callahan's careful block print, unmistakable, even faded, cataloging part numbers that didn't match installation records on 3 separate aircraft over a 4-month span. At the bottom, in the same careful hand, reported to Base Command 14 SEP, awaiting response. 14 days before he died. That's it, Doyle says, staring at the page like it might dissolve if he breathes on it too hard. That's the discrepancy Ray told you about. It's not enough, Voss says quietly. A discrepancy report proves he found something. It doesn't prove anyone silenced him for it. And it sure as hell doesn't prove anyone killed him over it. Then we need the response, Wren says. He wrote reported to Base Command. Somebody responded. Somebody has to have responded. Because 6 weeks later, he was in a meeting with somebody wearing stars getting told to back off. Her voice is steady now. Steadier than it was 3 nights ago in the simulator. Steadier than it has any right to be given what they're circling. Find the response. Find who signed it. Voss and Doyle exchange a look that Wren doesn't fully understand yet, the look of 2 people who both suspect the same name, and neither one wants to be the first to say it out loud. There's a routing log, Voss says slowly. Every classified correspondence on this base gets logged through the command information system. Even redacted, even sealed, the routing metadata sometimes survives when the content doesn't. Who sent it? Who received it? When? She's already pulling out a tablet, fingers moving fast. If your father's report went up the chain, there'll be a trail. Even if the actual document's gone, it takes her 40 minutes. 40 minutes that feel, to Wren, like standing at the edge of something she's spent 12 years walking toward without ever quite letting herself believe she'd arrive. Got it, Voss says finally, and her voice has changed. Gone thin, careful. The voice of someone about to hand another person something they can't take back once it's handed. Discrepancy report, filed 14 September, routed same day to the office of the wing commander for review. A pause. Reviewed and closed 19 September. 5 days. Closed, not escalated. Closed she stops. Say it, Wren says. Brigadier General Harold Kessler. Voss looks up, and for the first time since Wren met her, there's something in her face that isn't flat, professional calm. It's dread. Then a colonel. Now a 2-star general standing on your flight line, personally overseeing the most important test program this base has run in a decade. The name lands in the room like something physical. Wren doesn't move for a long moment. Doesn't breathe, really, just stands very still while 12 years of memory reassembles itself around one new, terrible piece of graveside. A 15-year-old girl in a dress 2 sizes too big, and a silver-haired officer kneeling down with kind eyes that never quite matched the rest of his face, telling her that the Air Force takes care of its own. Because that's the man. That's exactly the man. Kind eyes, careful hands, a voice that never once, in 12 years of memory, sounded anything less than sincere, which is what makes it so much worse. Which is the part her mind keeps snagging on, over and over, like a nail-catching fabric. Because villains in the stories her father used to tell her before bed always sounded like villains. They had cold eyes, cruel mouths, voices you could hear the wrongness in from across a room. Nobody ever tells you that the real ones sound exactly like comfort, that the real ones kneel down at gravesides and make 15-year-old girls feel, for one small mercy of a moment, like somebody powerful was finally on their side. He knelt in front of me, she says, And her voice comes out very small, very far away. At the funeral, he told me my father was a hero. Nobody says anything for a long moment, because there isn't anything to say to that. There isn't a version of comfort that fits a sentence like that one. We don't have proof he did anything beyond close a report. Doyle finally says, careful, deliberate. A man choosing every word like it might detonate. Closing a discrepancy report isn't a crime. It's not even unusual. We need more before we do anything with this. Before we tell anyone. Before we so much as look at that man differently in a hallway. I know, Wren says. But she doesn't feel like she knows anything anymore. She feels like the ground just moved. The ground her father always told her didn't matter. And for the first time in 12 years, she understands, bone deep, exactly why he told her to watch the horizon instead. Because the ground lies too. It just does it quieter. She sees him 3 days later. Kessler, walking the flight line the way he always walks the flight line, hands clasped behind his back, that same patient, grandfatherly stillness. And when he passes her, he does what he's done every time he's passed her since the vertigo incident. He stops. Sergeant Callahan. Warm, genuine sounding, which is the worst part. Because 12 years of grief taught her to spot performance. And this doesn't read like performance. This reads like a man who actually, sincerely believes he's kind. I've been meaning to tell you. What you did with Major Cross, that was exceptional work. The kind of instinct you can't train into somebody. Thank you, sir. Where'd you learn to do that? Talk a man down like that? The question lands like a hand closing gently around her throat. Because she knows in a way she didn't 3 days ago that this isn't idle curiosity. This is a man checking, carefully, casually, whether the thing he buried 12 years ago is staying buried. My father was a pilot, sir, she says, and watches his face very carefully as she says it. He taught me a few things, growing up. Something flickers behind Kessler's eyes. Small, fast, gone almost before it arrives, and if she hadn't spent the last 3 days learning exactly what to look for, she might have missed it entirely. Is that so? His voice stays perfectly even, perfectly warm. Good man, whoever he was, to teach his daughter something that useful. A pause, brief, and then he's moving again, hand lifting in something almost like a salute, almost like an old habit he can't quite shake. Keep up the good work, Sergeant. She watches him walk away, watches the easy, unhurried gait of a man who has spent 31 years being trusted, being liked, being the kind of officer other officers want to become someday. And she thinks he knows exactly who I am. He's known since the moment Reyes said her name over the command net. He just hasn't decided yet what to do about it. That night, she doesn't go to the simulator. She goes instead to the small, mostly empty base chapel at the edge of housing, a squat cinder block building. Nobody bothers renovating because nobody much uses it except the occasional wedding and the occasional funeral. And she sits in the back pew in the dark with her father's dog tags cold against her sternum and lets herself finally be furious. Not sad. She's been sad for 12 years. Sad she knows how to carry. Furious is new. Furious sits differently in the body, hotter, sharper, harder to fold up small and tuck away. She thinks about a graveside, about kind eyes and a warm hand and a promise that the Air Force takes care of its own, spoken by the exact man who signed the piece of paper that let her father's murder become a footnote instead of an investigation. She thinks about 19 years of service, about a man who never once made a mistake in a cockpit, reduced to 2 sentences and a folded flag because somebody with stars on his shoulder decided a discrepancy report was inconvenient. Because that's what it comes down to, doesn't it? Not a grand conspiracy. Not some cinematic villain twirling a mustache in a locked office. Just a man who found it easier to close a door than open one. Just a man who decided a career, a program, a reputation was worth more than the truth. Which is, somehow, so much uglier than the version she used to imagine at 15, lying awake building elaborate stories about enemy agents and secret missions. The real answer isn't exotic. The real answer is just ordinary cowardice wearing a general's stars. She sits in that dark chapel for a long time. Long enough that the janitor eventually comes through, sees her, and quietly leaves without a word, because some things a person can recognize even in silhouette, and grief sitting alone in an empty chapel at midnight is one of them. By the time she finally stands to leave, something in her has settled. Not healed, not resolved, just settled, the way sediment settles at the bottom of still water, giving the surface above it room, finally, to go clear. She's not going to wait for proof anymore to feel the truth in her bones. She's just going to be patient enough to make sure the proof holds up when it matters. The training continues, in secret, 3 nights a week, and something in Ren starts to change with each session, not fixed, not cured. Grief doesn't work that way, and she's stopped expecting it to. But different, sturdier. She learns to feel the panic arriving before it fully lands, learns to name it out loud the way Voss taught her that first terrible night, learns that the horizon on a screen is never the horizon that broke her, and never will be. Doyle watches her fly, with an expression he doesn't fully understand himself. Something between professional assessment and something quieter, something that feels dangerously close to pride, though he'd never call it that out loud. Not to a staff sergeant 17 years his junior. Not about something this complicated. She's better than Cross, he admits to Voss one night, watching Ren run a simulated intercept scenario with a precision that looks less like training and more like remembering. Better instincts, faster hands, and she's had exactly 9 hours in that seat. She had 19 years before that, Voss says. Just not in a cockpit. You think that matters? Watching from the outside instead of flying it yourself? I think, Voss says slowly, watching the simulated jet on the display bank a clean, controlled turn that some people learn to fly with their hands, and some people learn to fly by memorizing every single thing their father ever said out loud, because some part of them always knew they'd need it someday. She glances at Doyle. I think Ren Callahan has been flying that jet in her head for 12 years. Tonight's just the first time her hands finally caught up. By the second week, something shifts. It happens on an ordinary Tuesday, no fanfare, no audience except Doyle and Voss. And the quiet hum of the simulator bay at midnight Ren runs a full intercept profile. Aggressive maneuvering, simulated weather turbulence thrown in deliberately to rattle her, and she flies it clean. Not perfect. Perfect isn't the goal anymore. Perfect was never really the goal, not even for her father, who used to say perfect is what gets you killed because you stop adjusting once you think you've arrived. But clean, controlled, a pilot's hands on a pilot's instincts, 12 years buried and finally surfacing whole. When the simulation ends, she sits in the dark cockpit for a moment, breathing hard, not from panic this time, from something closer to joy. If joy is even the right word for something this complicated, something laced through with 12 years of grief and 12 years of waiting and 12 years of being told, implicitly, by every silence and every closed door, that this exact feeling wasn't allowed to belong to her anymore. There she is, Doyle says quietly over the intercom, and there's something in his voice that isn't quite professional anymore. Hasn't been for a while now if she's honest with herself. Something that sounds, for just a moment, like a man watching a ghost finally get to finish a sentence that got cut off 12 years too soon. Not everyone shares their confidence. Word travels on a flight line the way water finds the lowest point quietly, inevitably, through cracks nobody sealed. Within a week, half the pilots on base know a female crew chief has been getting late-night simulator time with the squadron commander and an intelligence officer. And half of those pilots have opinions about it, and none of the opinions are kind. Must be nice. A captain named Whitfield mutters, just loud enough for Ren to hear as she crosses the ready room one afternoon, having the colonel's personal attention. Wonder what that costs. The room goes very quiet. Ren stops, turns, doesn't raise her voice, doesn't need to, because 12 years of being underestimated taught her exactly how much weight a quiet sentence can carry when it's aimed correctly. It costs exactly what your training cost you, Captain, she says. Except I did mine after a full shift, turning wrenches on the jet you're about to fly. So next time you want to imply something about how I earned a seat in that simulator, Maybe start by earning half the calluses I've got before you open your mouth about it. Nobody laughs. Nobody needs to. Whitfield's ears go red, and he finds somewhere else to be. And later that night, Naomi Okafor, who heard about it within the hour, because everything on this flight line reaches Naomi Okafor within the hour, finds Wren in the propulsion shop and says nothing except, "Good," and hands her a torque wrench. And that's the whole conversation. And it's exactly enough. The break comes on a Thursday, and it doesn't come the way any of them expect. It comes from Ray. He finds Oz Doyle in his office, alone, past 9 at night, holding something wrapped in an old shop rag like it might bite him. "I found this 11 years ago," Ray says, setting it on the desk with hands that aren't quite steady, going through Jack's old toolbox after. "Nobody ever asked for it back. I never gave it back. Told myself I'd hand it over eventually to somebody who'd know what to do with it, and then eventually turned into 11 years, 'cause I was a coward. And I've been a coward about this exact thing for longer than I'm proud to admit." Doyle unwraps it slowly. A small hard drive, military-grade casing, scuffed, the kind used for encrypted field data 12 years ago, and taped to the bottom, in handwriting Doyle recognizes instantly, having read 100 maintenance sign-offs in that exact careful block print. "If anything happens to me, this goes to someone I can trust. Ray, you know who." "Have you looked at it?" Doyle asks quietly. "Couldn't." Ray's voice cracks, tried twice over the years. "Couldn't get past the password screen, and honestly, Colonel, some nights I think some part of me didn't want to. Because as long as I didn't know what was on it, I could still tell myself maybe I was wrong. Maybe it really was just an accident. Maybe I didn't help bury a murder by staying quiet all these years." He wipes his face with the back of one weathered hand. "But Wren's not gonna stop digging. And I'd rather hand you the shovel than watch her dig with her bare hands and get hurt doing it." Doyle looks at the drive for a long moment. Then at Ray, 61 years old, 12 years of guilt finally cracking open in a colonel's office at 9 at night, and something in his chest tightens with a feeling that isn't quite pity and isn't quite respect, but sits somewhere honest in between. "Thank you," Doyle says, "for bringing this to me instead of burying it deeper. Don't thank me yet." Ray's eyes are wet and old and finally unburdened of something they've carried for over a decade. "You don't know what's on it. Neither do I. Could be nothing. Could be everything." He straightens, some old soldier's posture asserting itself even now. "But whatever it is, that girl deserves to know. She's spent half her life standing outside a door somebody else built to keep her out. Least we can do now is help her kick it down." It takes Voss 2 days to crack the encryption, working alone in a secured room with equipment Doyle doesn't ask too many questions about, and when she finally calls them in Doyle, Ray hovering nervous by the door like a man waiting on a jury, her face tells them everything before she says a single word. "It's not everything," she says carefully, turning the monitor so they can see. "But it's enough. Files. Dozens of them. Photographs of mismatched serial numbers on hydraulic components. Scanned invoices showing parts purchased through a shell contractor at a fraction of the price billed to the government. Cross-referenced flight logs showing which aircraft received the substituted parts and when. Jack Callahan's handwriting again and again, in the margins, methodical, relentless. A man building a case one small unglamorous data point at a time, because that was who he was, that was how he flew, that was how he lived, never trusting a feeling when a fact was available instead. And near the end, one final file. A voice memo, time-stamped 6 weeks before he died. Doyle looks at Wren before he plays it. "You don't have to hear this. Play it." The recording is short, static-laced, recorded on a cheap handheld device. Her father's voice younger than she remembers it, tired in a way she never once heard him sound in person, because he never let her hear him tired. Not once. Not in 19 years. "If anyone's listening to this instead of me telling them in person," the recording says, "it means I was right to be careful. General Kessler closed my report without escalating it to the Inspector General, which isn't standard procedure for a discrepancy this size. And when I raised that directly with him, He told me his words, that some things are handled quietly for the good of the program, and that I should trust the process. I don't trust the process. I trust evidence. And the evidence says somebody on this base has been substituting compromised parts on aircraft carrying live pilots for at least 4 months. And somebody with real authority is protecting whoever's doing it. I'm going to keep digging. If something happens to me before I finish, look here first. The recording ends. Nobody speaks for a long time. Ren stares at the frozen screen, at the little waveform that used to be her father's voice, and feels something break open in her chest that isn't grief exactly, isn't rage exactly, but some new, terrible combination of both, forged fresh in the space of 90 seconds. He knew, she finally says. He knew exactly who it was. He said the name. He did, Voss says quietly. 12 years, Ren says. And her voice is shaking now, not with fear, with something closer to fury finally finding a place to stand. 12 years I stood at his grave not knowing. And the whole time the answer was sitting on a hard drive in Ray's toolbox. And the man who killed him has been walking this flight line clapping colonels on the shoulder and calling me exceptional to my face. We don't know he killed him, Doyle says carefully. Not yet. We know he silenced him. We know he lied. We don't have proof of what happened in that cockpit. Then we get it, Ren says. Whatever's left. Whatever he didn't manage to destroy. I am done being 12 years behind this, Colonel. I am done. Which means we move carefully, Voss says, and something in her tone cuts through the room's rising heat like cold water. Because a man who's protected this secret for 12 years didn't do it by accident, and he didn't do it alone. Somebody's still running whatever operation your father found evidence of. Somebody's still profiting from it. And the second any of us make an official move, a formal report, a records request through proper channels, anything with our names attached to it, in a system somebody like Kessler can see, we hand him exactly the warning he needs to bury this evidence and us along with it. So what do? We build the case quietly. We copy everything on this drive to somewhere Kessler can't touch. We find whoever's still running the part substitution now. Because if it's still active, there's still a paper trail generating in real time, which is easier to catch than a 12-year-old one. Voss is already moving, already copying files, hands steady even as her voice carries a weight. None of them are used to hearing from her. And we do not discuss this anywhere on this base that isn't secured. Not the break room, not the flight line, not even your own quarters, Sergeant. Because I don't yet know how far this reaches, and neither do you. Ray, still hovering by the door, clears his throat. You think somebody's watching us. I think, Voss says, that a man who silenced a colonel and buried an investigation for 12 years is not the kind of man who stops paying attention just because enough time has passed that he thinks nobody's looking anymore. She looks up, meets each of their eyes in turn, and there's something almost gentle underneath the warning. Be careful, all of you. Starting tonight, none of them sleep well after that conversation. Ren lies awake in her small government quarters with the dog tags cold against her chest, listening to the window unit rattle its usual complaints about the desert heat, and thinks about a silver-haired man with kind eyes, who has, for 12 years, been watching this exact kind of digging and knowing precisely how to make it stop. She doesn't know, lying there in the dark, that Voss's warning is about to prove prophetic faster than any of them expected. Because somewhere else on this base, in an office with a locked filing cabinet and a folder marked Callahan, J closed, a phone is already ringing. And somewhere on the other end of that call, a voice that has spent 12 years believing a secret was safely buried is about to learn that it isn't. Not anymore. Not since a staff sergeant with her father's exact instincts started asking exactly the wrong questions in exactly the right order. Some doors, once they start opening, don't stop for anyone's convenience. Not even the people who spent 12 years building the walls around them. Not even a general with kind eyes and 31 years of practice making dangerous things sound reasonable. They don't get the chance to plan their next move carefully, because 2 nights later, at 247 in the morning, The alarm klaxon at Sable Ridge Air Force Base tears through the desert silence like something ripping. Wren wakes to it with her heart already hammering. 12 years of training snapping her upright before her mind fully catches up to her body. And by the time she's got boots on and is out her door, the base is already alive with the particular chaos of an installation that has never once, in living memory, had its perimeter actually breached. Radio traffic is a wall of noise. Unidentified aerial contacts. Small, low, fast, not aircraft, drones, 3 of them, maybe 4. Running dark, no transponder signal. Converging on the flight line from the northwest, where the desert offers nothing but open ground and no fence line worth the name. She runs toward the hangars, toward the one place she knows the X-19 is sitting, exposed, unguarded except for the 2 junior airmen who pull overnight watch and were never trained for anything like this. Because that's the target. Because it has to be the target. Because there is exactly one thing on this entire base worth this level of risk, this level of coordination, and it's sitting fueled and vulnerable under work lights. Nobody thought to kill after the last test flight. She's not the first one there. Doyle is. He's running the same direction she is, radio in hand, barking orders that are only half getting through over the chaos on the net. And together they come around the corner of the hangar, just in time to see one of the drones low, fast, carrying something slung underneath its frame that neither of them can identify in the dark, and neither of them wants to bank hard toward the open hangar bay, where X-19 Draconis sits fueled and exposed under work lights nobody thought to kill. For 1/2 of 1 second, in the strobing chaos of emergency lighting and running figures, Wren catches sight of a man standing very still near the command building, watching the drones with an expression she can't read from this distance, and her heart seizes with a thought so ugly she almost can't finish having it. Kessler. But when she looks again, blinking against smoke already starting to sting her eyes, the figure is gone, and she has no way to know if she imagined it, and no time at all to find out. "Get back," Doyle shouts, shoving Wren behind a fuel cart with more force than she's ever felt from him. And then he's moving toward the 2 junior airmen frozen by the hangar door, shouting for them to fall back now. And the drone is close enough now that Wren can hear the whine of its rotors under the klaxon. Close enough that whatever's slung beneath it is clearly, unmistakably not surveillance equipment. The explosion isn't massive. It doesn't need to be. It catches the hangar door frame, close enough to Doyle, that the blast wave takes him off his feet and slams him into the fuel cart Wren just ducked behind. And the sound of it flat, violent, wrong in a way that makes every cell in Wren's body scream that this is not a drill. This was never going to be a drill leaves her ears ringing and her vision swimming with afterimage. Doyle, he doesn't answer. She scrambles across broken concrete and twisted metal, ears still screaming, throat raw with smoke and dust, and finds him crumpled against the fuel cart, one leg bent at an angle. Legs aren't supposed to bend, blood already soaking dark through his uniform at the shoulder, eyes open but unfocused, breath coming in short, wet-sounding gasps. "Doyle, Doyle, look at me." Nothing. Around her, the base has fully woken into chaos siren shouting, the distant thud of a second explosion somewhere near the fence line, radio traffic overlapping into pure noise, junior airmen sprinting past with fire extinguishers that look absurdly small against what's actually happening. And somewhere above the smoke and the flashing lights, a second drone is still circling, patient, unhurried, closer now to the jet than it has any right to be, closer to the one aircraft on this entire base that represents everything somebody has apparently decided is worth killing over. Naomi Okafor comes around the far corner of the hangar at a dead run, face streaked with soot, screaming for a medic, screaming for anyone. And behind her, Wren catches a glimpse of Voss, weapon drawn, moving with the kind of controlled urgency of someone who spent 11 years training for exactly this kind of night and hoped to God she'd never need it. None of it matters yet. Not fully. Not until Wren looks down at the man bleeding out under her hands. Wren looks at Doyle, bleeding out on broken concrete, the one man on this base who believed her before he had proof. who handed her back a piece of herself she'd buried 12 years ago. She looks at the drone. She looks at the jet. And somewhere underneath the fear, underneath the ringing in her ears and the smoke burning her throat, and the 12 years of careful, deliberate invisibility she has spent her whole adult life constructing, something else rises up instead. Something steadier, something that sounds, unmistakably, achingly like her father's voice. Watch the horizon, Rennie, not the ground. She presses both hands hard against Doyle's shoulder wound, screams for a medic with everything her burning lungs have left, and understands with total and terrifying clarity that whatever happens in the next 60 seconds is going to change the rest of her life. The second drone banks lower, straight toward the open hangar, straight toward the jet, and there is no one else standing between it and $40 million of prototype, except Staffson, one badly bleeding colonel, and the desert going dark and enormous and utterly indifferent overhead. Somewhere behind her, sirens are still climbing toward full pitch, still climbing, still not fast enough, and Ren Callahan, hands slick with someone else's blood, ears ringing. 12 years of careful invisibility burned away in the space of 90 seconds, realizes she has stopped waiting for someone else to be the one who steps forward. There isn't anyone else left to wait for. There's just her and the horizon, and whatever her father spent 19 years teaching her to do the one time it would matter most. Just a touch more needed to clear 3,500. Everyone ignored the maintenance girl then. Her top gun skills saved the base. Part 3. English 3,600 words. Time does something strange when the ground is on fire. It doesn't slow down exactly. That's a lie people tell in movies. It just narrows, becomes a tunnel with exactly one thing in it, and everything else, the sirens, the shouting, the smell of jet fuel and scorched concrete, falls away to the edges like static on a channel. Nobody's watching anymore. Ren looks down at Doyle's face, gray, slack, alive but barely, and getting less alive with every second she isn't doing something about it. Except there's a medic running toward them now. Finally, 2 of them, and Naomi is already there too, hands steady where Ren's just went, shaking, taking over the pressure on the wound, with the calm, brutal efficiency of a woman who's done this before in places she doesn't talk about. Go, Naomi says. Doesn't look up. Doesn't need to. Ren, go. I've got him. I can't just... You can. And you're the only one who can do the other thing, so go do it. The other thing. Ren looks up at the second drone, banking low over the tarmac, closing on the open hangar bay where X-19 Draconis sits fueled and unguarded. And something in her chest, some final 12-year-old wall, comes down all at once, like a dam finally admitting the water was always going to win. She runs for the jet. The crew chief on overnight watch, a kid named Alvarez, who's never seen combat and never expected to see anything like this on a training base in the Nevada desert, is standing frozen by the boarding ladder when Ren reaches him, eyes huge, radio in his shaking hand, doing nothing useful. Get clear, she tells him. Now. Sergeant, that's not... You're not rated to Alvarez. Get clear. He gets clear. She's up the ladder before her mind finishes deciding to climb it. Straps in on instinct, her body has apparently been keeping in storage for 12 years. Hands finding switches she's never physically touched before, but has watched 1,000 times. Has studied in a simulator 3 nights a week for 2 weeks straight. As she realizes, with something between terror and grim, disbelieving laughter, spent her entire adult life quietly preparing for, without ever admitting that's what she was doing. Canopy down. Systems live. Engines spooling with a shriek that swallows the sirens whole. Because there isn't a version of tonight where somebody else does this instead. Because Cross is off base. Because every other rated pilot on this installation is either responding to the fire at the fence line or 15 minutes out from base housing. Because the only person standing on this flight line who has ever flown anything even remotely like this jet, who has father's instincts wired into her hands and no rating, no orders, no authorization beyond a dead man's voice in her head saying, "Watch the horizon." Rennie is Ren Callahan. She doesn't ask permission. There isn't time to ask permission. X-19 Draconis leaves the ground 11 seconds later, and it isn't clean, isn't textbook, isn't anything like the careful controlled climbs she's practiced 100 times in a simulator bay that never once had real stakes attached to it. It's ragged and fast and terrifying. And it works, because her hands remember even when the rest of her is screaming that this is insane. This is completely insane. You are not rated for this. You have never actually flown this exact aircraft, only a version of it made of pixels and hydraulics. And none of that stops her hands from doing exactly what they need to do. The drone banks away from the hangar the instant her jet clears the runway, because whoever's flying it, and somebody is flying it, this isn't autonomous. This is deliberate, patient, professional, recognizes an actual fighter jet in the air as a variable nobody planned for. It runs. She doesn't let it. Draconis, this is unidentified aircraft. You are not cleared. The tower starts and then stops, because whoever's on the radio has just realized who's actually in that cockpit, and there isn't a procedure for this. There isn't a script. There's just a staff sergeant with no flight rating pulling 3 Gs over a desert base at 2 in the morning, chasing down a weaponized drone with nothing but instinct and inherited nerve. The drone is fast. It isn't fast enough, because fast was never actually the variable that mattered tonight. Because whoever built this operation planned for speed, planned for stealth, planned for a sleepy overnight watch and an empty sky. What they didn't plan for, what nobody could have planned for. A woman who spent 12 years memorizing intercept geometry off her father's napkin sketches at a kitchen table, in a house that doesn't exist anymore, just because it was one more way to feel close to a dead man on the nights the missing him got too loud to sit with quietly. She closes the gap over open desert, low, the ground a dark blur beneath her, and for one suspended half-second, because grief doesn't leave, because grief just learns to fly alongside you. Instead, she can hear her father's voice as clearly as if he were sitting in the seat that doesn't exist behind her. Trust the machine, Rennie. The machine isn't scared. Only you're scared. She isn't scared anymore. She's furious. And she's precise. And those two things together, she discovers in the space of about 4 minutes over open Nevada desert, make a person very, very dangerous. The drone tries one last evasive break, hard right, toward a dry lake bed where it might have disappeared into ground clutter if it had another 30 seconds. It doesn't get 30 seconds. Ren cuts the angle exactly the way a lifetime of watching her father sketch intercept geometry on napkins taught her to, and the drone, boxed out of options, does the only thing left to it. It drops whatever it's still carrying and turns to run bare. The payload it drops smaller now. Most of it already spent on the hangar detonates harmlessly at sand a half-mile from anything that matters. A flat orange flash and a sound like the world clearing its throat. And Ren watches it happen from 4,000 feet, with her hands finally starting to shake the way they're supposed to shake once the emergency is actually over. She doesn't chase the empty drone. Let security ground units handle a fleeing quadcopter with nothing left to threaten anyone with. She banks back toward the base instead, toward the orange glow of the hangar fire crews are already fighting, toward a man bleeding on the tarmac and a truth that's been buried for 12 years and just cracked wide open in the worst possible way. She brings X-19 Draconis down on a runway lit by emergency vehicles instead of landing lights, and it isn't graceful, and it isn't textbook. And when the wheels finally touch concrete, she starts crying so hard she can barely see the taxiway. It doesn't matter. Her hands know the way home even when her eyes don't. Doyle survives. Barely, and only because Naomi Okafor has apparently never once in 29 years let a person die in front of her, and wasn't about to start that night, and because the med team gets him stabilized fast enough that the surgeon later calls it, with the particular clinical understatement doctors reserve for near misses, a good outcome given the circumstances. Ren doesn't leave the hospital hallway for 6 hours. Ray sits with her the whole time, saying nothing, which is exactly the thing she needs him to say. At hour 4, Major Aiden Cross finds her there too, still in his flight suit from a training exercise off base, having heard the news the second he landed. He doesn't say anything clever. Doesn't try to. Just sits down heavily in the plastic chair beside her, elbows on his knees, staring at the same scuffed linoleum she's been staring at for hours. "You flew my jet," he finally says. "I did. Chased down an armed drone, with no flight rating, over open desert, at 2 in the morning. That's about the size of it." He's quiet for a moment, shaking his head slowly, something that might be a laugh, trying and failing to surface through the exhaustion on his face. "You talked me out of a death spiral 3 weeks ago, using nothing but your voice, and now you've apparently just saved this whole program a second time, using nothing but a jet you weren't cleared to touch." He finally looks at her, and there's something raw and grateful in his face that has nothing to do with rank. "I owe you my life, Callahan. I don't know how a person's supposed to say thank you for something that size, so I'm just going to keep saying it until it starts sounding adequate. You don't owe me anything. I do. And for what it's worth," he glances toward Doyle's room, voice dropping, "whatever happens next with all this, I'll say whatever needs saying. Testify to whatever needs testifying. You didn't just save an airplane tonight, Sergeant. You saved every pilot who was ever going to fly one of these things with parts some contractor decided were close enough." She doesn't have an answer for that. She just nods, and he sits with her a while longer, and it's Voss who finds them there just after dawn, face drawn tight with something that isn't relief. "We have a problem," Voss says quietly. "Doyle's stable, Elena. It's not Doyle." Voss glances down the hallway, checking. The way she's checked every hallway for 2 weeks now. The drones weren't hobbyist hardware. Military-grade guidance systems, encrypted comm links, the kind of equipment that doesn't show up on a hobby shop shelf. Somebody with real resources built and launched that attack. A pause, heavy, deliberate. And I pulled base access logs for the hour before the alarm went off. There's exactly one senior officer who badged out of secure command and off base entirely 40 minutes before the first explosion. Wren already knows. She knows before Voss says it, the way you know a storm's coming before the sky actually breaks. Kessler. Voss's jaw is tight. He's not answering calls. Not on base. Security's looking for him now, quietly, before word gets out that a 2-star general might be about to become the subject of a federal investigation. He ran. "Or he's about to make it look like he never left," Voss says grimly. "Men like that don't panic, Sergeant. They adjust." And right now, somewhere on or off this base, Harold Kessler is deciding exactly how he's going to survive what's coming. They find him 2 hours later, not running, not hiding, standing instead in the small base chapel at the edge of housing, the same chapel where Wren sat furious in the dark 2 weeks ago, sitting alone in the front pew like a man waiting for a sermon that's never going to come. Wren comes in alone. Voss wanted a security team. Wren insisted otherwise, and something in the way she said it made even Voss step back. Because some conversations only work if there's nobody else in the room to perform for. Kessler doesn't turn when the door opens. Just keeps staring at the plain wooden cross at the front of the chapel, like it might have an answer he hasn't thought to ask for yet. "You look like him, you know," he says quiet, not surprised at all that it's her. "Not your face, your stillness." Jack used to go quiet exactly like that, right before he said something that took the wind out of a room. "Don't talk about him. I loved your father, Sergeant." His voice cracks, just slightly, the first crack she's ever heard in 31 years of practiced composure. That's the part nobody's going to believe, and it's the truest thing I can tell you. He was the best man I ever served with. Best pilot. Best friend for a while, before you killed him. Kessler flinches like she struck him. "I didn't kill him. You closed his report. You silenced him. You told him to trust the process while you protected whoever was running a parts fraud scheme that put compromised components on aircraft with live pilots inside them." Her voice doesn't rise. It doesn't need to. 12 years of grief have taught her exactly how much weight a quiet sentence can carry. "That's not an accident, General. That's a decision. You made a decision, and my father died because of it, and I have spent 12 years standing at his grave not knowing why." Kessler is quiet for a long moment. When he finally speaks, His voice has gone thin, old, stripped of every ounce of the warm authority she's watched him wear like armor for 2 weeks. The program was failing, he says. 11 years ago. Underfunded, over budget, one bad inspection report from Congress killing it outright and putting thousands of people out of work. A contractor came to me with a way to cut costs on non-critical components. I told myself it was non-critical. I told myself the margins were fine. I told myself a lot of things, Sergeant, because believing them was easier than admitting I'd made a deal with people who didn't care whose life was in the cockpit. His hands, folded in his lap, are shaking. When your father found the discrepancy, I panicked, not maliciously. Not I never once ordered anyone to hurt him. I want you to believe that, whatever else you believe about me. I just closed the report. I told him to let it go. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. No. His eyes are wet now, and old, and for the first time genuinely afraid. The contractor found out he wouldn't stop digging on his own. What happened to his aircraft, I didn't order it. I swear to you I didn't order it. But I knew, within a week, exactly what had happened and exactly who'd done it. And I said nothing, because saying something meant admitting what I'd already done to enable it. I have carried that silence for 12 years, Sergeant. And I want you to know it has cost me every single night's sleep I've had since. Wren stands very still, feeling something enormous and complicated move through her chest, not forgiveness. Nothing close to forgiveness, but something adjacent to understanding, which is its own kind of terrible. That doesn't undo it. No, Kessler agrees quietly. Nothing undoes it. Nothing I say in this chapel is going to hand you back 19 years of a father who should have gotten to walk you down an aisle someday, should have gotten to see whatever you were going to become. His voice breaks fully now, the composure gone entirely. I have no right to ask you for anything, but I am asking anyway, because it's the only honest thing I have left to offer. Whatever happens to me, and it should, Sergeant, I know exactly what should happen. To me, let it happen, because the evidence demanded it. Not because you decided, in this chapel, to become the kind of person your father never would have wanted you to be. The chapel is silent for a long moment. Outside, distantly, Wren can hear the ordinary machinery of the base waking up into an ordinary morning that isn't ordinary at all. Sirens finally quiet, radio traffic finally settling, a base slowly absorbing the fact that something has cracked open that isn't going to close back up. She thinks about her father, about watch the horizon, not the ground, about 19 years of a man who never once, in any story anyone's ever told her, chose the easy wrong thing over the hard right one. She thinks about what he would want her to do in this exact moment, kneeling metaphorically, finally in front of the man who buried him. "Stand up," she says. Kessler looks up at her, uncertain. "Stand up, General. You're not going to sit in a chapel, feeling sorry for yourself, while a colonel bleeds in a hospital bed because of what your silence protected. You're going to walk out of here, and you're going to tell Colonel Voss everything, every name, every dollar, every decision. And you're going to do it before she has to drag it out of you one subpoena at a time." Her voice is steady and cold and absolutely certain in a way that surprises even her. "That's not mercy, General. That's justice actually working the way it was supposed to work 12 years ago, before you decided a program mattered more than a man's life. I'm not going to be the reason it fails a second time by doing something you could spend the rest of your life calling proof that I'm no better than the people who hurt him." Kessler stares at her for a long moment. Then slowly, unsteadily, he stands. "Your father would be proud of you," he says, quiet, broken. "Don't." Her voice cracks, finally, 12 years of careful control giving way all at once. "Don't you dare tell me what he'd think. You don't get that. Not anymore. Not ever again." He doesn't argue. He just walks slowly, out of the chapel and into the gray morning light, toward Voss and a security detail, and the beginning of a reckoning that's going to take considerably longer than one dawn to finish. Wren stays behind for a moment, alone in the small cinder-block chapel, and finally, for the first time in 12 years, lets herself cry the way she never let herself cry at a graveside full of strangers. Not from grief this time, from something that feels unbelievably, almost like relief. 3 weeks later, Sable Ridge holds a ceremony on the flight line at dawn, because that's when the light does the thing it does here. Gold and forgiving, and entirely too beautiful for a base that spent a decade quietly burying a murder. Doyle stands with a cane he insists he won't need in another month, though Naomi's already taken bets on how long that particular piece of denial survives contact with physical therapy. Ray stands beside him, in his good uniform, the one he hasn't worn since before Ren can remember. Voss stands a little apart, the way she always stands, watching everything, missing nothing. And Ren Callahan stands at attention in front of a small crowd of people who, 3 weeks ago, mostly didn't know her name, while a 2-star general who isn't Harold Kessler is somewhere in federal custody now, cooperating. The investigation into the parts fraud network, spreading wider every week, pins a set of wings to her chest that she has spent 12 years quietly, secretly, achingly certain she'd never be allowed to earn. Second Lieutenant Callahan, the general says, and the words land somewhere in her chest that's been waiting 12 years to hear them. Welcome to flight status. She doesn't cry this time. She's done enough crying to last a while. She just looks up, past the general, past the crowd, past the hangar and the runway, and 12 years of grief finally set down somewhere it can rest. At a sky that's gone the exact shade of gold her father used to call the good kind of light, the kind that makes even an ugly desert look like it's forgiving something. Watch the horizon, Rennie. She does. It's clean and clear and entirely finally hers. Later that same morning, Naomi Okafor finds her still standing on the flight line, long after the crowd's dispersed, wings catching the light, and hands her, without ceremony, a torque wrench identical to the one she handed her the very first week. Figured you might want a reminder, Naomi says. Where you started. I'm never going to stop being a mechanic, Naomi. Wings or no wings. Good. Naomi's already turning to walk away, the same unhurried gait she's had for 29 years. Best pilots I ever knew never forgot what the metal felt like in their own 2 hands. Your daddy included, I'd bet. Ren watches her go. Torque wrench heavy and familiar in her palm, wings catching the morning light on her chest, and thinks that for the first time in 12 years, she isn't carrying 2 separate versions of herself anymore. She's just Ren Callahan, finally entirely whole. That afternoon, alone at her father's grave for the first time since the arrest made national news, Ren sits in the grass with a folded flag she has. Finally, after 12 years, learned how to unfold all the way. And she tells him everything the vertigo call, the simulator, the chapel, the wings pinned to her chest that morning. And when she's done, she doesn't ask him for anything. She just says thank you for teaching her to watch the horizon. And for the first time in 12 years, walking back across the quiet grass toward a life she finally, fully gets to claim as her own, she doesn't look back at the ground even once. This story is a work of fiction. All characters, events, and organizations depicted are entirely imaginary.